Hi, Isaac.
Rabbi, good morning. It's so good to see you.
Good morning. Good morning. I think we're still on the Sermon on the Mount.
Yes, we
Uh,
are. Yes, we are.
okay, you can get going.
The Gospel according to Matthew, chapter 7, verse 6. Do not give dogs what is holy, and do not throw your pearls before pigs, lest they trample them underfoot and turn to attack you.
Isaac, what does this mean?
This to me, it's like an enigma, right? This is an enigma, and I mean enigma. Well, in a way, it's profoundly wise. But when Jesus says this thing, the people whom his audience did not accept him, right? Or he did not have a receptive audience. But he somehow went coming back to them again and again, saying, Here's the kingdom of God. Here's what I want you to do." And then, so to me, I look at this more. It's there's some wisdom in this.
Well,
It's
why do you say his, again, like if we were just reading Matthew straight, I wouldn't say that people don't accept him either yet or in general. I would just say he has a like moment where he like gives the Ten Commandments, where he's giving over his Torah, he's giving over his info, and that's the Sermon on the Mount. And right now, he's kind of testing the waters. I just don't see him as like being rejected yet.
fair enough. I was probably coming at this from a more holistic view, from a
Yeah,
different
you
view.
got
So, so
2000, Isaac, you got 2000 years hindsight.
So correct. So based on what we've seen so far, he's not been rejected yet. He's not been rejected yet. There is no pushback. There is no negative feelings towards it. And so to your point, yes. So from that perspective, this is more a conundrum. It's more a puzzle. What does this mean?
Okay, so Isaac, before, do you have a sense of what you think it means?
Well, so do I have a sense of what it means? That's a good point. Well, I cannot separate my 2,000 years of Pauline, of Pauline theology from this.
Tell me your Pauline interpretation. I accept. You can be as Catholic as you want to be today.
I want to be as Catholic as I want to be today. I think what you say, that the way I look at this is, I'm pointing to the kingdom of God. In this, as Christians, you're called to live a certain life. If you don't have a receptive audience, or if it's not, if the message is not being accepted, just walk away, right?
Message. Okay, so you're doing the classic. If the message, so this is about the interlocutor. This is about the speaker. The protagonist is Jesus, and Jesus is telling the folks that if you guys don't listen to me, I will walk away. And then if you go to the kingdom, or if you become part of the kingdom of heaven, enter kingdom of heaven, and then you try to be evangelizing the folks, then and they don't listen, you should walk away. So that's what you're saying?
Right. Yeah, that's correct.
Wow, the Christians have been horrible at this message forever. Then, like this has been the greatest failure of Christianity, specifically during, let's say, the medieval times, in the Middle Ages. That with people don't listen, they probably have not taken that tack. Okay, that is one interpretation. And I think that very interesting. I think we're going to give a different interpretation. I think the interpretation you gave is pretty classic. I wouldn't even call it Pauline necessarily, but I think when we look close at the words, we're going to see a different interpretation. But before we go to that interpretation, I want to do what we always do. There's a lot of nouns and ideas that are taking place, and I like to place them in their historical and rabbinic context to start. And hopefully, once we flesh out the various facts of 7:6, then we'll be able to see like a little bit more what the contemporaneous person would have been hearing in the Galilee. Okay.
So when you see of that, I'm reminded of this. So when I read the word pigs, to me it means nothing. But to a Jewish audience, pigs means certain things, as in the most lowest thing, as in things which is the things you don't touch, the things you don't eat, right? And so I can't imagine how I can't imagine how this might have come across to the initial audience.
Right.
Um,
Okay. So let's go line by line and see. So it's, if anything, I feel pigs is the easiest word to deal with. The
okay.
other words are a little more. Okay. So let's start. Give not which is holy unto the dogs. Okay. So when you hear that which is holy, you naturally, I could hear verbiage, hear speeches, hear monologues. But when a person would have heard that which is holy, they wouldn't have thought of a speech or words that are holy. They would have thought of holy things, and that would be holy meat from the temple. And that actually, when you think about it, is probably the original context. Don't give that which is holy to dogs. This is actually something they would do all the time. We have endless Mishnayot, rabbinic texts, about what happens if you have a carcass and it died on the Sabbath. And are you allowed to give it to the dog? What happens if you have a holy item, namely that was misused in the temple? Is that garbage? Does it have to be burnt? And not only that, but even when you look at the actual verse in Deuteronomy 23:19, I'll read it to you in English. It's talking about prostitutes and I'd say zonas, what kind of whores, but it says in 23:19, I'll read it in English, you shall not bring the fee of a whore or the pay of a dog into the house of your God in fulfillment of any vow, for both are abominations of God. So most people, it's a question, what does it mean, the price of a dog? But I'm going to give you two interpretations that will at least lend itself to help us understand the place of a dog. Number one, some people think the price of a dog just a male prostitute. But I think the Rashi on that verse points out that if a person has payment by, let's say a prostitute gets paid by a sheep, she can't bring that sheep to the temple because that sheep is tainted. But what happens if Rashi explains, what happens if that person was paid with a sheep and then they transfer for a dog or transfer for the money for a dog, it can't be also be used. So over here we see that the idea of a dog's payment is something negative. When you look in rabbinic literature, which this is what I thought would be the most interesting thing for you today, when we switch to rabbinic literature has endless things to say on dogs. Pigs are not kosher, pigs aren't holy, great. But dogs, I think, even in our society, when you think of a dog, Isaac, do you think of positivity, cuteness, niceness, evilness? What do you think of today?
Of course, all of the above.
All of the
Positive,
above.
cute, niceness, companion, all of the above.
So I would say that's similar to what they thought in the first and second and third centuries, but a little bit different. Let me read you some text. In Talmud Shabbos, page 63. For those of you who, like me, own dogs, make sure they are properly trained, because anyone who raises an evil dog within his home prevents kindness from entering into his home, since poor people will hesitate to enter his home, as it says in a verse, blah blah blah. Rab Nachman bar Yitzchak said, one who keeps an evil dog in his home even divests himself of fear of heaven. That means, the kingdom of heaven. One more story, which I think is really interesting. A pregnant woman who entered to use the oven in a certain house to bake, because a lot of times they didn't have ovens in their houses. They had to go to the city's oven. The dog in that house barked at her and her fetus was displaced. The owner of the house said to her, do not be afraid, because his teeth have been removed, his claws have been removed. She said to him, take your goodness and throw it out on the thorns. Your encouragement is useless, as the fetus has already been displaced and will certainly die. So over here, we see the idea that A, you can have a bad dog that's trained. Number two, even when you try to make your dog take its teeth out or declawed, it still could be very negative. And the last one is in Ketubot of the Babylonian Talmud, page 41. It says, Rabbi Nathan said, from where do we learn that a person should not raise a bad dog in his house? I want to keep focusing. There's the idea of the bad dog. It should not place a rickety ladder in his house, because the verse says you should not place blood in your house. A bad dog is a killer, and a rickety ladder is a killer. So the last line, which I thought you'd find really interesting, and I think it refers directly to this, is Rabbi Lezer says in Baba Kama, page 93a, says, one who breeds dogs is like one who breeds pigs. Okay, so we see this pig dog parallel, exactly paralleling the metaphor of the New Testament, and that dogs and pigs are both viewed as kind of negative things. That being said, I just want to throw out, they did have good dogs in that society. They did mention hunting dogs, they did mention sheep dogs, they did mention guard dogs, they did mention a lot of positive things. I'll tell you one positive, because I personally love dogs. I don't want to leave you with a negative dogs. And in the Yerushalmi Talmud, it says in Trumos in the 8th parak, page 46, a certain person invited a sage to his home, and the householder sat his dog next to him. The sage asked him, how did I merit this insult to sit next to a dog? The householder responded, my master, I'm paying the dog for his goodness. Kidnappers came to the town, one of them came and wanted to take my wife, and the dog attacked him and ate a part of him. So what we see in that time period is that dogs were inherently not bad. They're generally viewed bad because they are used to be trained to be bad. But as opposed to either Persian or Roman society, which would have had a more positive sense, dogs were definitely viewed in a negative sense in that society. When you look at rabbinic literature in general, I think this is the general sense that we have. So what we have to start when we look at this, give not that which is holy, probably means don't give holy offerings or the holy meat. You could use them in the metaphor. You could have a metaphor to say that means language, but the original context almost definitely did not mean holy words. It would have meant don't give that which is holy to dogs, and then that's A. And then neither cast your pearls before swine. So what will, let me ask you really quickly, what will swine do to the pearls, and what will dogs do to the holy meats? What would you think they're going to do?
Yeah, so dogs do not know meat is just meat. They do not. So we say holy because, to your point, it comes from the temple. Right? The dogs, meat is just meat. So, so I would just say, what do dogs do with meat? If they eat meat, if it's a meat-eating dog, they probably eat the meat. But in terms of pearls and swine, pearls before swine, you cannot chew. Animals cannot chew pearls, right? Pearl, it's a diamond. It's a metal. It cannot be chewed. And so can you swallow that? I mean,
okay, go on.
So
you're saying that dogs will eat the holy meat, but pigs will not eat pearls. So correct. The metaphor,
meat is just meat. The dog doesn't know this is holy meat or unholy meat. When you put a meat before a dog, it's just meat.
So I'll be honest. I took an opposite approach. I don't think anyone ever fed pearls to pigs, but I think that anyone who's ever experienced a pig knows that they'll eat corn, nuts, bean husks, anything that you throw away, anything edible. But they'll also eat, if you experience pigs, you also know that they'll eat almost anything. They'll even eat seashells on beaches. So now that we know these seashells, I think the general sense that probably was not empirically tested in the first century when Jesus says that pearls were one of the most expensive things that they can imagine. Mm-hmm. And they assumed that a pig who will eat garbage, will eat anything that you throw out, mm-hmm. will eat acorns that seem inedible in a forest. They'll eat seashells, even if they don't process it properly. Nonetheless, there was a sense that they, just like dogs, would be happy to eat a carcass of a holy offering and not differentiate between that which is holy and unholy. So too, a pig would be happy to eat anything in front of it, because pigs are just consumers of endless things. So that's the kind of sense that I took from this. But you're saying that a deeper idea, maybe like even to throw things that are pearls, which are so expensive for a pig, even though it won't eat it. So I took it the opposite way. And
so to your point, yes, it could, right? So it could in the sense that if it's, it cannot chew it, it's probably going to, if it might swallow the pearl, then yes.
So before we go to the second half of the parable, mm-hmm. I just want to explore what you just said, what you said earlier regarding, I think, the more standard way to interpret this. Most people say you shouldn't give holy words to people who can't handle it. Let me ask you a quick question. Aren't the people who can't handle the holy words, or who will mock it, or who will debase it, aren't those the people that need to hear those holy words the most?
Correct. So this was my earlier point. This is where we started, right? So because so it's more to do the message. You want to take the message to the audience, but the message is there for the audience. But he's saying if they don't accept it, you don't share the message with them.
How are they expected to repent, Isaac? If they never hear the word of God,
correct. Yeah.
How are they expected to repent?
And that's why I said this. We said this is a conundrum. It's an enigma, because here comes Jesus, and this is me from a Pauline, 2,000 years of Pauline perspective. He's sharing his message, and he says, if people don't accept you, don't share this with them. But then he also speaks about love, and you have to go share, be your neighbor.
You're not saying it's a conundrum. You're saying it's a contradiction.
Well.
A conundrum is something that's hard to understand. An enigma, something that maybe is hard, but you dig deep in, you'll figure it out. It's like a maze. What you're
So,
saying, he's saying contradictory things that we can't quite know which one he meant.
so this is with the 2,000 years of following Christianity, looking at Jesus as both Christ and Lord. To me, on the surface level, it does seem like a contradiction. So then I asked myself, could there be something more about it? And so then if I to look at this, then I look at this as a conundrum, as an enigma, to a point where
people didn't know when they first read this. People didn't know if this was referring to Jews, to non-Jews, to heathens. Who should you not teach this to, if that's the right interpretation? And I just want to throw those 2 points into their rabbinic context and throw in one line from Maimonides in the Middle Ages. It's really interesting when you look at the Jewish attitude towards teaching non-Jews Torah, or things that they're not going to inherently accept. And we see that there's 2 very famous opposite perspectives. The first one, which is very, very famous, is by Rabbi Yochanan, who is a rabbi from Palestine, living in the 3rd century. He says, a non-Jew who engages in Torah study is liable to receive the death penalty. Death penalty. As it stated, Moses commanded us the Torah. It's inheritance of the congregation of Yaakov. It's inheritance to the Jews and not to the non-Jews. So that one isn't, that statement by Rabbi Yochanan is not necessarily you trying to proselytize, you trying to convince. It's a non-Jew who engages in it. But that's usually said in direct contradiction and contradistinction to a very famous Breita by Rabbi Meir, because he says, how do we know that a non-Jew who engages in Torah study is considered like a high priest, the high of highs? Because it says, you shall therefore keep my laws and my creeds, which if a man does, he shall live by them. And we learn from that, priests, Levites, Israelites are not specified, but rather a man, which indicates mankind in general. You have therefore learned that even a non-Jew who engages in Torah study is considered like a high priest. So again, these are generally the 2 opposite viewpoints. Don't teach them, or it's the best thing in the world. But over here, that's not necessarily an improper student, and it's not necessarily teaching them. There's a very famous line from Maimonides that he says in the rules of Torah study in the 4th chapter in the 1st halacha. He says, Torah should be taught only to a proper student, one whose deeds are attractive, or to one whose behavior is unknown. However, a potential student who follows bad ways should be influenced to correct his behavior and trained to follow a straight path. And only after he repents his deeds and his deeds are examined is he allowed to enter the house of study to be instructed. So if what Jesus said was a contradiction, maybe Maimonides is answering it. One time he says, reach out to everyone. Another time he says, only reach out to the people who are listening. Maimonides possibly gives the answer, because he says, he's not going to hear anything. He's not going to listen. Only if the person has good behavior and his deeds are attractive can you do it. So that means, Maimonides says, that after he repents his deeds and his deeds are examined and he goes on a good path, then he can have ideas. Ideas are only for after. There's a famous, Maimonides continues, whoever teaches an improper student is considered if he throws a stone to Mercury. In other words, he does idolatry, does the worst thing. He's almost giving them power to go in the wrong direction, which I think is super interesting. Again, I don't think this is Jesus' perspective, but this Maimonidean perspective would answer to the contradiction / conundrum / enigma that you are mentioning. Okay.
Yeah, if Maimonides says that, then there is lots of truth. Then there's lots of truth to it. So thank you for that. Thank you for that.
If anything, you see that in the 1st century, specifically the stories of Acher, that they probably were not so focused on that. I think when Jesus went to synagogues to preach on the Sabbath, they didn't like do a test. Are you proper? Are you proper? They just kind of gave the teachings in a general sense. Okay, but now let's go back to our parable. So we gave the classic Christian interpretation, namely it's talking about holy words, but I want to read close to the words. I looked through all the commentaries I could find, Christian and Jewish. I just can't find people who talk about this. I think it's so interesting. Let's do it one more time. Give not that which is holy to dogs. Don't throw your pearls down before pigs, lest they trample them under their feet. Isaac, what did we expect it to say, and what does it say? We would have expected it to say, definitely dog, lest he eat it, lest it be demeaned, lest he condescends upon that meat that was holy, lest the pig puts that pearl in his mouth and decides to crush it, try it out, spit it out, lest they destroy it. But what does Jesus say?
Lest he trample
them under their feet. No one looks at dogs ever and worries about them trampling stuff under their feet. Pigs, at least pigs a lot of times are in a pig pen. A lot of times pigs are in mud, in dirt, in feces. And for them to trample under their feet would be to soil the holy. But dogs run in packs, dogs rip apart. So the metaphor doesn't work both ways. So I think the idea is not that we're worried about the dogs or pigs eating it. You know why? Because Jesus says, lest perhaps they trample them under their feet. What does it mean to trample holy things under your feet? It means that they're not worried about taking these ideas and making them so that they'll be used wrongly. They're worried that the actual way that either the heretic, the other Jews, the heathens, those who hear the ideas of the kingdom of heaven, they'll demean those ideas. So Jesus is not worried about what we think he's usually worried about. He's not worried about some people we're wasting our time as we started. I'm wasting Jesus' time, or you're wasting your time evangelizing to those folk. He's saying those folk are going to demean the Torah or demean the New Testament, demean the messages that are set on the Mount, that it would be beneath the ideas to share with them, to put these ideas in those places in the hands of those people. But we're not done. If the metaphor stopped there, I would have been happy. I feel that we would have had a complete understanding. But there's actually another line, Isaac. What was the last line say?
And turn to attack you.
And tear you to pieces. So what is this last line saying? It sounds like there's all these steps that you have to take. There's you saying words that are holy. They take those words, they demean those words, they make them worthless, and then they go and use those words that they misinterpreted, that they misapplied, that they made sure that no one could possibly get the proper message from, and they use that to show that your perspective is wrong, that you make no sense. So I think this is the actual metaphor. The metaphor was never worried about teaching to hypocrites, not worried. The message is that there's almost a mimetic relationship. When you teach it to them, it's going to reflect upon you that you're teaching the wrong ideas. You need to have proper students, not because they're going to not listen. He doesn't care at all if you don't listen. If anything we know about Jesus is that you could not listen up the wazoo. You cannot listen for 2,000 years. He is completely fine with that. If he has no students, he only has one apostle, don't care. This was never his worry. He's worried that once you hear the message, you're going to misinterpret. You're going to trample it under your feet. You're a pig who can't understand what to do with holy ideas. And then you're going to apply it. And then we're going to see the mirror image of your horrible ideas in Jesus. And therefore, his message will not be able to be thrown out. So this is actually a message for the masses that they need to prepare. They need to learn properly. They need to have proper actions and thought, such that when they are receptacles to the teachings, they'll be able to properly reflect them and not be able to misuse the teachings in a way that misuses Jesus. And again, like I said earlier, this is probably one of the most misused ideas. Certain people use this verse as the proof that the Eucharist has to only be eaten by people who are baptized. How could you eat the Eucharist? You're not baptized. Doesn't make sense. You have to be a follower. But it was never about the followers. It was about misusing Jesus himself. And I think that's like the underlying message of this metaphor. So all the people who worry about the Eucharist, or all these people who worry about teaching hypocrites, all these people who are worried about throwing away, jettisoning, ejecting, all the people who aren't fitting, the only thing that they're worried about is making sure that it's not reflecting the Christianity that's being spread.
That's yeah, okay. That's it's a very different take on it, right? As in it's putting the burden on the one listening, and to say
yeah, exactly. It's
listen.
transferring the message from the speaker to the listener, which personally makes sense if you're giving a monologue on a mound. It makes sense when we look at the ending of the actual metaphor, it makes sense that this is something that Jesus would be concerned about. He's not concerned necessarily about hypocrites. He's not concerned about people who aren't going to accept him. He's concerned about people who are going to accept him and misuse his teachings. And if anything, if we have looked at the history of Christianity, it's something that he was correct to be concerned about. That people look at him and they say, a lot of times, this is something we say about Maimonides, that people look at Maimonides and they see themselves in the mirror. I would say that's true about Jesus as well. People look at Jesus and they say, well, I'm a socialist, Jesus was a socialist. I'm a capitalist, Jesus was a capitalist. I care about the poor, but I only care about this way. That's what Jesus. I think you should murder people in order to make sure that they follow in line, because faith is the only thing that saves. That's what Jesus wanted. So people are able to see themselves in the mirror. And I think that's what he was most concerned with in this metaphor.
I don't have much to add to that.
Okay.
What you just said is, it's profound and deep and requires lots of reflection. So, Rabbi, thank you. And
Let's call it a day.
the point being that people can see themselves in this message, and they'd make, they would make what they want to make out of it. And he was I calling that out, asking folks to be cautious, to be careful, to be mindful.
Okay. Awesome, Isaac. Okay, thanks so much. To be continued.
Rabbi, on that note, thank you, Rabbi.